the thing that really initially started off the whole lyrical strand of the piece was I was driving home from the studio one night having written some music but not having any kind of lyrical concept yet developed in my mind. And there was a road accident, very bad road accident on the motorway. And everyone was slowing down to look at the accident and, you know, rubbernecking as we call it in the UK. And and there was a sign at the top, you know, across the road saying "police incident," as there always is when there's something like that. And I started to think about the word "the incident." It's a very kind of mechanical, very cold, detached word for something that is obviously very traumatic and very dramatic, certainly for the people involved. And as I was driving through the incident, I had this kind of very poetic, surreal moment, which is a moment when I felt the presence of the people that had presumably died in the accident inside the car with me. And I felt that if I looked in the rearview mirror, I would see them in the back seat of the car. So it was a very kind of strong, powerful moment. And it gave me the idea that I like this contradiction between the very detached use of the word "the incident" with these very traumatic, very emotional, life-changing or potentially life-ending events. I have a very kind of business-like work ethic when it comes to writing. People say to me sometimes, you know, do you wake up in the middle of the night with this idea for a song or something? And I never have. I go to my studio for 6 or 7 hours a day. I work, I write, I record, I mix, I go home. And I do that every day when I'm working, when I'm not on the road. I do that pretty much every day. And that's why, in a way, I think I've been able to produce so much work over the last few years, is because I do have this strong work ethic. I think I get it from my father, and possibly also from the fact that I started out, you know, when I left school, I did start out working, you know, in a proper job for 4 or 5 years. And it does give you that kind of work ethic, that kind of 9 to 5 approach. And I've always worked like that, and the incident was no exception. I set myself the task of writing this long song cycle, and I went to the studio every day for a month last September, I think it was, and by the end of that month, I had the first 35 minutes of the incident mapped out with, you know, structure, the music, the lyrics, and everything. And I presented that to the band. And then the band kind of took it on board and began to develop the ideas further. So really, all of the music was written pretty much in my own little studio, which is nothing more than the bedroom I grew up in my parents' house. Not very glamorous.
The year of Sgt. Pepper.
Well, I definitely think this is a post-solo album, Porcupine Tree album, because you know, there are certain things I think I learned from making the solo record, and I allowed myself to try some techniques out that I probably wouldn't have tried out before in a band context. The chronology of it is that the Insurgentes album was written from January till August and finished in August, and as I've already said to you, I pretty much sat down and started writing The Incident in September, you know, so almost immediately the solo album was finished. So I'm sure there must be, again, it's not something I'm necessarily so conscious of myself, being too close to it, but I'm sure there must be some sense of continuity from having literally finished the solo record and then moving straight into writing The Incident. And the funny thing is, I also noticed that the 3 best things I think I've done, I now can call my In trilogy, because we have In Absentia, Insurgentes, The Incident. How about that? And the In trilogy. And I think that probably the 3 best things I've done, certainly in a sort of rock context anyway. We all go off and record on our own in our own studios, but we also come together and in commercial studios. We did a lot of the acoustic instruments, the drums, the acoustic guitars, the piano was all done at Air Lyndhurst, for example, which is a wonderful studio in North London, near where I live. And we also went to a studio out in the country called Monkey Puzzle to try, you know, that whole kind of hippie thing about getting it together in the country and getting away from technology. And we came up with some really good material from those sessions. We wrote together as a band actually in the country. We came back with Bonnie the Cat and Flicker and Parts of the Incident and Remember Me Love, all came from that too. So, but ultimately, you know, the thing these days is that it's very easy to produce music to a very high level in a home studio. The technology is so good now. And I know exactly how things are supposed to sound in my little home studio. For all its faults, I know what I'm hearing. I don't always understand what I'm hearing if I go to a big studio like Air. It sounds fantastic, but then everything sounds fantastic in Air, you know. How can you really be sure it's going to sound good on your little hi-fi at home? So I guess for me, part of the appeal of recording in a home studio is it is almost like a glorified stereo hi-fi system. And if it sounds good on that, you know it's going to sound good on everyone's little stereo or their iPod or whatever it is they're listening to. So we all tend to pretty much work in our own studios these days. I'm the songwriter, but the band actually are all better, technically much better than me. I'm kind of the weak link when it comes to the musical side. So it's very rare I would ask them to do things. But what I would say is that because I'm the songwriter, obviously I do have a very clear idea about how my baby should be born, you know. And if it doesn't feel like it's being born in the right way, then yes, I'll say, I'm sorry, that's not right. And that can be very frustrating for the musicians, because sometimes, of course, they're quite rightly they're saying, well, you know, I want to put my own stamp on it, otherwise what's the point, you know, if you just want. And they're right, but at the same time, I'm right too, because it's my song and this is the way it's supposed to sound, you know. So you do inevitably you get those kind of frustrations from both sides. But part of the whole thing about being in a band. A band ultimately is, it's a contradiction in terms anyway, because every band is a group of people that have to compromise in order to get along with each other. But at the same time, I do believe that every band has to have a captain. And so there's immediately a kind of contradiction in terms there. If every band was completely democratic, I think the music would be not so good, shall we say. So I think there has to be a strong central point of control in the sense of the sort of vision for the sound, the vision for the lyrics, which are mine, the songwriting, the production, all those things. But at the same time, you have to leave plenty of space there for other people to contribute to, otherwise, what is the point of a band? So it's finding that middle ground, you know, and the great bands, I think of a band like The Who, you know, Pete Townsend obviously controls that band, but The Who are completely a band in the classic sense, in that you can recognise everyone's contribution in that band. So for me, I feel like that it's always a very difficult thing to strike exactly the right balance, and when you don't strike the right balance is when you do get friction. It's all part of being in the band.
Photograph the hole it leaves.
The moment, okay, it goes like this. The actual first phase, when you've got nothing written, is awful. The staring at the blank page is the worst feeling in the world. I hate it. It's that kind of feeling, shit, I'm never going to write anything again. It's all gone. I've written every song I'm going to write. And I always have that when I start something. I'm like, I've got nothing left to say. Then gradually, you start to prove yourself wrong. And for me, the next phase is the best. You go from the worst to the best, which is when you've actually created something from nothing and you're not bored with it yet, it's still fresh. The emotion, you're most in touch with the emotional perspective that you have with the track. You've just written it, so you're completely in tune with it emotionally. 6 months later on, that might be not the case. So you feel totally inside it, you've just created something from nothing, you listen back to it, you realise you've written a good song, great song, or whatever it is song. That's the best feeling in the world for me. Best feeling in the world. Then gradually it becomes more then about the refinements, the technique, the artistry of creating the final. That becomes more of a technical process. I still enjoy that. I mean, I love playing with sound, and I love experimenting with sound, producing, experimenting with textures, particularly in surround sound. It's fantastic. But for me, that moment of having created something from nothing, that's the special moment.